You're at a party, not a loud one, maybe 8 or 9 people at someone's apartment. Warm lighting, comfortable music, wine being poured. You're there, smiling when it's appropriate, answering when someone asks. You're not unhappy, exactly. But somewhere underneath all of that, there's a part of you quietly counting down. Not to the end of the evening, just to the moment you can leave, to the car ride home, to the silence of your apartment, to the specific feeling of closing the door behind you and letting out a breath you didn't realize you were holding all night. And here's the part that's hard to say out loud, that exhale is the best part of your day. Maybe you felt guilty about that. Maybe someone has looked at you with soft concern and said, you need to get out more. Maybe you've turned down an invitation and spent 20 minutes wondering what's wrong with you. What if nothing is wrong with you? What if your preference for solitude isn't a wound, isn't a dysfunction, isn't something to be fixed, but is one of the most psychologically complex and neurologically distinct ways a human being can be wired? That's what we're going to explore today. Not as flattery, as a genuine decoding of what it actually means to prefer being alone. Western culture has quietly constructed an idea that social engagement is health and withdrawal is illness. That the person surrounded by others is thriving and the person who wants to be alone is suffering. And when something is that deeply embedded in a culture, you don't just absorb it intellectually, you absorb it emotionally. You start to feel like your preferences are symptoms. But here's what the research actually says. Neuroscientist Elaine Aron, who developed the concept of the highly sensitive person, found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population shows measurably deeper processing of both sensory and social information. Their brains aren't broken, they're high resolution. And a high resolution brain, after a full day of input, needs more time to process, more quiet, more space. That need isn't a flaw. It's the natural recovery rhythm of a very specific kind of mind. And here is a piece of neuroscience worth sitting with when your brain is not engaged in external demands, not performing, not processing social input. A network of brain regions activates called the default mode network. Scientists once thought this was the brain simply idling. They were wrong. The default mode network is where you integrate memories, build your sense of self, imagine the future, revisit the past, construct the narrative of who you are. It's where creativity incubates, where empathy is processed at its deepest level, and it is most active in solitude, not in sleep, in the quiet, conscious, undemanded state, the long walk without headphones, the bath, the hour with nothing to do. When society tells you that you're wasting time alone, neuroscience says the opposite. Your brain, in those quiet hours, is building architecture that social stimulation simply cannot. Now, people who prefer solitude don't all come to it the same way. Some people prefer it because conversation, at its best, isn't social for them, it's intellectual. They don't want small talk, not from arrogance, but because shallow interaction feels genuinely painful, like being forced to color inside lines when all you want to do is paint. They come alive in one-on-one conversations about ideas that actually matter. In those moments, they're not withdrawn at all. They're luminous. But in a group, at a networking event, they go quiet, not from shyness, but from a kind of aesthetic offense. Daniel Kahneman's work on deep versus automatic thinking is useful here. These people live predominantly in the slow, deliberate mode where insight is made, and that mode needs quiet to function. But then there's another group entirely, the ones who are alone, but genuinely never lonely. Who can spend an entire weekend inside, not depressed, not hiding, but completely absorbed in a project, a book, a piece of music, a world they're building in their mind. Their imagination is so active, so dimensionally rich, that solitude isn't empty, it's full. Psychologist Mihaly called this state flow deep, absorbed engagement, where self-consciousness dissolves and time stops behaving normally. Flow is almost impossible to achieve in constant social engagement. It requires quiet, uninterrupted time. These people aren't escaping life. They're living it most fully when they're in it alone. Then there are the people who didn't choose solitude so much as learn it. Somewhere in their past, maybe childhood, maybe a relationship that asked too much, they discovered that people are unpredictable. That emotional openness in the wrong company can cost you something you don't get back easily. So they developed a quiet calibration. They became very good at reading rooms before entering them, at knowing within minutes whether a space feels safe. Carl Jung described the introvert's inner world as a place of extraordinary richness and wrote that the return to solitude isn't retreat, it's homecoming. And then there is the harder experience, the one that doesn't get spoken about honestly enough, the people who genuinely want connection, deeply and painfully, but find the mechanics of social life exhausting in ways they can't explain. They are not indifferent to people, they love people, they think about people constantly, but the doing of it, the actual socializing, drains them in a way that makes them feel fundamentally broken. They go to the dinner and they're warm and funny and everyone has a wonderful time. And then they go home and lie in the dark for an hour because their nervous system needs to reboot. And then they feel guilty about that and then guilty about the guilt. If you recognize this, if you've spent years wondering how you can love people so much and still find them so tiring, hear this clearly. You are not contradicting yourself. You are navigating a real tension between what your heart needs and what your nervous system can sustain. You don't need less love. You need different delivery systems. Deeper conversations instead of larger gatherings. Relationships that can hold quiet without rushing to fill it. Do you remember being a child and having a place you'd go when things felt like too much? Maybe your room, maybe a corner of a garden, or the bathroom at a family gathering where you'd sit on the edge of the tub and just breathe. Think about the quality of quiet in that place. It wasn't empty, it had texture. And inside that quiet, you were more fully yourself than you ever felt when people were watching. You were processing, recovering, making meaning out of things you didn't yet have words for. You were doing something that looked like nothing but was, in fact, everything. Attachment researchers like John Bowlby understood that secure attachment in childhood creates a safe base, a place from which a child can explore the world and return to be replenished. What many solitude-preferring people discover, often early in life, is that their safe base is internal. It's not a person, not a place exactly, it's the interior world itself. And eventually, the ones who find the deepest peace are the ones who stop apologizing for that. They're not performing extroversion to make other people comfortable. They've built a life that fits them, not one that looks right from the outside, but one that feels right from the inside. A handful of people loved deeply. Work that genuinely absorbs them. A relationship with their own interior life that is, honestly, one of the most nourishing relationships they have. Martin Seligman's research on flourishing identifies meaning and engagement as core elements of a genuinely well-lived life. Not social performance, not constant connectivity. These people have both. And they've learned something the culture finds almost threatening, that you can be alone and be well. So let's come back to you. You at the party, waiting for the exhale. You turning down the invitation and sitting with the quiet uncertainty of what that means. What does all of this actually say about you? It says you have a mind that processes rather than skims, a need for interiority that is not a symptom but a feature, an essential, irreplaceable part of how you experience the world. It says you have almost certainly been misread. By others, yes, but perhaps most painfully by yourself, because we see ourselves through the lenses the culture hands us. And the culture has handed you a lens in which your wiring looks like a limitation. But what if your preference for solitude is not you failing at connection, but you succeeding at something the world doesn't have a good word for yet? At the quiet, serious work of becoming someone who knows their own mind. At maintaining an interior life rich enough to sustain you and to offer something real to the people you do choose to let in. You were never the person who needed fixing. You were always the person who needed understanding. If something in this video felt like being seen, drop it in the comments. Not your personality type. Just the part that finally made sense. Because that's what this is for. Not psychology as performance. Psychology as recognition.